Buenos dias, amigos. That's about all the Spanish I know. And I think I said good morning, so it's probably not even morning for you. Anyway, today we're going to do 0.7, which is on roots. So cube roots and square roots. And for some reason this is super blurry, so sorry about that, but not much I can do about it at this point. So this is a square root of a number is one of its two equal factors, such as 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. So for example, 1 is 1 times 1. 4 is 2 times 2. So you have two equal factors, so two of the same factor. 9 is 3 times 3. 16, 4 times 4, or 4 squared, 3 squared, 2 squared, etc. So those are all called perfect squares. Okay. What is the relationship between squaring a number and finding a square root? So those are kind of inverse operations. So squaring a number means if I have a number, let's just say 10, and I am, well, let's not say 10, let's say 4. If I have 4 and I'm squaring it, that means I'm doing 4 squared, which is 16. However, if I'm square rooting 4, like this, that means I'm saying what times itself equals 4, and that would be 2. Okay, so those are inverse operations, they're opposites. Okay, so they are different. So if I'm squaring something, that means I'm making it bigger, usually. So it's being multiplied to itself. If I'm square rooting, typically that means you're making it smaller. So square root of 4, what multiplies to itself to be 4, and that is 2. Okay. Again, the square root of a number is one of its two equal factors. Remember, factors are when you're multiplying things. If x squared equals y, then x is the square root of y. 5 squared equals 25, so 5 is the square root of 25. Hopefully square roots are not, this is not a new concept for you. Wow, I don't know why this is so blurry, but we're going to have to deal for today. Okay, so find the square root. Square root of 64. So 64 is 8 times 8. So the square root of 64 is just 8, because 8 times itself equals 64. This right here, that sign means plus or minus, so it could be positive or negative. So when you find your solution, you have to put in a plus or minus before it. Okay, you can't tell, but this says square root of 1.21. Okay, so think of this as square root of just 121. Square root of 121 is 11. However, this is 1.21, so your decimal has moved 2 places this way. Okay, so that means when you square root it, your decimal is going to move 1 place. So it always cuts in half. So if your decimal, if you move your decimal, so for example, square root of 121, if I move my decimal twice on the inside of the square root, then I'm going to move it once on the outside. If I move it 4 times on the inside of the square root, that means I have to move it twice on the outside, or on the solution of the square root. Okay, so the square root of 1.21 is 1.1, because square root of 121 is 11. Okay, when you're square rooting fractions like this, notice I kept my plus or minus sign right here. So when I'm square rooting this fraction, I'm going to keep the negative, because it's out in front. And then I'm just going to square root 25 and square root 36. So you can do that with square roots. You can split them to the top and the bottom of fractions. So that comes out to be negative 5, because 5 times 5 is 25, over 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. Now we run into this, square root of negative 16. So we know that 16 is 4 times 4. And negative 4 times negative 4 is also 16. So neither of those give us a negative number, and that's because the only way you can get a negative is to do a positive times a negative. Okay? The only problem with that is these aren't equal. One's positive and one's negative. So we actually can't do the square root of 16, negative 16. Okay, so we're going to say this is undefined, or we're going to say non-real. Because we'll actually talk about imaginary numbers, and which would be the case of this, where you're square rooting a negative. So we're going to say this is a non-real number. It's imaginary. Okay. All right, I'm going to let you guys try these. This one says 9 over 16, square root plus or minus square root of 0.81, negative square root of 49, square root of negative 100. So you guys go ahead, try those 4 problems, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. Pause this in 3, 2, 1, pause. Welcome back, friends. So on this one, the first one, I just did square root of 9, which is 3, over square root of 16, which is 4, so it just comes out to 3/4. This one, you move your decimal twice to the right, it becomes 81. So square root of 81 is 9, so because we move it twice on the inside of the square root, you have to move it once on the outside, so it goes from 9 to 0.9, and it keeps the plus or minus there. This one is negative 7, because we keep the negative, and again, you can't square a negative number, so it's non-real on that one. Okay. Okay, now we have an equation to solve. Okay, so with this one, I'm going to rewrite it because it's kind of blurry again. So this says t squared equals 169. Okay, so to cancel out a square, if you remember me talking earlier, the inverse of a square is a square root. So I'm going to square root both sides, like this. And that's going to cancel out the square. So square root both sides. If you want to draw your line, you can. So square root of t squared is just t. Square root of 169, I think it's 13. Okay, however, if you think about it, 13 times 13 is 169. Also, negative 13 times negative 13 is 169 positive. Okay, so because of that, whenever you are square rooting in an equation like this, you have to put in a plus or minus in front of the square root. Okay, so we get t equals plus or minus square root of 13. So it could be positive 13, it could be negative 13. All right, so, all right, you guys go ahead and try these. And again, we'll talk about it later. Pause this in 3, 2, 1, pause. All right, so for this one, I got a equals plus or minus 17, because I square rooted both sides, and I kept my plus or minus here. And on this one, I got m equals plus or minus 0.3. That's because there's 2 decimals on here, so there's going to be 1 in your solution. You always cut it in half. Okay, and again, you have your plus or minus. And on this one, I did square root of 4 over square root of 25. So square root of 4 is 2, square root of 25 is 5. So I get plus or minus 5. And that's because we square rooted in all of these equations. Okay, so when it's giving you an equation, remember an equation has an equal sign. So like x squared equals 100. If it's giving you an equation like this, you have to use a plus or minus sign. If it's just like an expression like the ones up here, there's no equal sign. It's just saying what's the square root of 64. That's just positive 8 because you don't have to do plus or minus there. Okay, because the plus or minus should be in the front of the square root already. Okay. Moving on. I think we were to the next one. Okay. Cube roots. Cube roots is similar to a square root, except now that you have 3 equal factors. So if x cubed equals y, then x is the cube root of y. Okay. If it's x to the 3rd power, we read that as x cubed. We have perfect cubes such as 8, because 8 is 2 times 2 times 2, or 2 to the 3rd. 27 is 3 times 3 times 3, or 3 to the 3rd. And 64 is 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 to the 3rd. 1 is also a perfect cube. That's 1 times 1 times 1. Same with 0. Okay, so looking at some cube roots, those all say, see, it's so blurry. I'm going to rewrite those. So what those should say is cube root of 125. So cube root has a 3 up in the corner of the radical. We call these radicals. This is cube root of negative 27. Okay, so 125, I know that breaks down into 25 and 5. 25 I know breaks down into 5 and 5. So now I have 5, 5, and 5. So 1, 2, 3 5s. So that tells me that the cube root of 125 should be 5. Now, if you remember, with a square root, you can't square root a negative. But with a cube root, if I have 3 negatives, like negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, well, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So those ones cancel. But then I'm left with 1 more negative. So with a cube root, you can have negatives on the inside, because with 27, that breaks down into 9 and 3, and 3 and 3, and then we have a negative. So if I do negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3, well, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, positive. And then 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So with cube roots, you can have negatives. Square roots, you cannot. And that's because 3 factors can be negative, 2 factors can't, because they would cancel out. So this one would be negative 3. All right. Next. Maybe. Okay, so I'm going to have you try these ones. Those all say cube roots, so cube root of 729. Cube root of negative 64, and cube root of 1000. Okay, so try those ones, and we will talk about it when you're done. Okay, pause this in 3, 2, 1, pause. All right, so I got 9 on this one, because 9 times 9 times 9 is 729. This one is a negative 4, because we have a negative in here, and we can have a negative cube root. 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. And this one's kind of nice because it's 1,000, 3 zeros. So 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. So cube root of 1,000 is 10. All right. Okay, last thing is now solving equations using cube roots. So it says Dylan has a planter in the shape of a cube. It's convenient. That holds 8 cubic feet of potting soil. So we've got our cube. There's my cube for a planter. Solve the equation. 8 equals s to the third. So the volume, if you remember, volume of a cube is side times side times side. So that would be side times side times side. So volume equals side cubed, and then we're going to solve that. So 8 equals s to the third. To solve that, I'm going to do the opposite of cubing something and cube root it like that. Cube root that. Now with the cube root, you don't have to do the plus or minus because it's always just going to be whatever you're taking the cube root of, whether it's positive or negative. So cube root of 8, 8 is 4 and 2. 4 is 2 and 2. So we have 3 2s, 3 groups of 2s. So each side would be 2 feet, maybe? Cubic feet, yeah. So 2 feet each. Okay, so with cube roots, you don't have to do the plus or minus on equations. With square roots, you do. All right, and that is all for roots. So hope you are enjoying the videos and stay watching them. And I'll see you guys all in class next time. Okay. Adios, amigos.